Hey guys, Ben Crawshaw here. Thank you so much for taking time today to join us for this webinar. I appreciate it. I always say this, but I know all of you are busy. I've been in church world for a long time. I know you're busy. You have a lot going on. The demands in church world are never ending. There's always something else that you could be doing. So for you guys and girls to have carved out some time in your schedule to join us for this webinar, I really, really appreciate it. We're depending on technology for this, which is awesome because it keeps us from, spending money on rental cars and flying to conferences and renting out space. And it's just free. It's a free training. But also, technology can be frustrating as well. So first thing I want to do is just find out if everybody can see me and hear me. Okay. So Russell's going to be joining me on today's webinar. So I'll start with you, Russell. Can you see? Can you hear? Everything's coming through clearly?
Yeah, everything looks and sounds great to me.
Okay, awesome. So throughout this webinar, there's going to be a chat stream. I don't know if you can see it there on the side. There's people on there already. Some of you saying, what's up? Jump on there. Let us know where you're from. But we're going to utilize that chat stream throughout this webinar. And Russell's going to be fielding some of those questions and then passing those along to me. I can't do two things at once, so I can't read questions and present at the same time. So Russell's going to be taking care of that. But also, we're going to try to have some people from the Rocket Company team that are answering questions in that chat stream as we move along. But just know that we'll get to as many questions as we can, but we may not be able to get to all of them. Also, if you have questions or you see a question that somebody else typed that you feel like in your experience you have an answer to, I would love for you to jump in and answer that question yourself, because we are not the experts. We've learned a lot. A lot of our products come from you and what you do. We learn from you and just curate that and bring it together. So we want this to be a conversation between leaders, between you guys and us and each other. That's the way we love for webinars to happen. So Russell, what's happening in that chat stream right now?
There is a lot happening right now. We got a lot of people. Looks like we got Mike from the UK. We got David from Kentucky, Bob from North Carolina. They're flowing in. All the friends are here.
All the friends are here. Illinois, North Carolina. MO, that's Missouri, or is that Montana, or what is that, Russell? What is MO? What state is that?
I'm about to have to Google it. I want to say
Montana, because I would think, well, I don't know. I would think Missouri would be MI. Anyway, that we'll talk about that in the next webinar. How about that? All right. Well, I appreciate it. Again, you guys taking time out of your schedule. MO is Missouri. Somebody just answered. Sorry that you just educated Russell and I, and we appreciate it. We learned
very much,
which is awesome. So what I'm about to do is I'm going to switch and share my screen, and it'll go full screen so that you can focus on that. Some of you have been to webinars that I've done before. I talk really fast, and I'm sorry. I try to make myself talk slower, but it doesn't work. So I'm going to be a fast talker. There may be points that you miss. And if somebody else catches it, type it in the chat stream and let them know the answer, or we'll follow up with you later if you missed anything to make sure you have all the information that you need. Okay, so bear with me here for a second. I'm going to turn my screen share on. All right, I'm going to and then we are going to play from the start. Russell, how does that look? You see and hear everything fine?
Yep, all looks good.
All right, great. Let's jump in, guys. And again, I talk fast. I'm sorry, but Russell will be fielding questions. We'll have the Rocket Company team in there trying to field questions as well, and we're gonna get moving. We're talking about solving the church attendance puzzle, and obviously we're not going to be able to in 30, 45 minutes together solve this entire puzzle, but that's what we're going to be talking about. My name is Ben Crawshaw. I'm director of content at the Rocket Company. Started in ministry in 1998. I love small churches. The church I grew up in was small. My first church job was at a small church. My dad's a pastor of a small church. And I just love you guys because you got to wear so many hats and utilize so much creativity and so many volunteers to make things happen. And I'm passionate about helping churches and making a difference. There's my family. I have a third daughter on the way at Thanksgiving. So it's going to be 4 girls and I, and I'll just be, captain of the cheerleading squad with the Crawshaw family, but excited to have our third girl on the way at Thanksgiving. So my goal today is for you to feel hope about the future of your church body. And if you stay until the end of this webinar, I'll share a very practical tip for leading people who infrequently attend. So stay till the end and we'll talk about that. Now, a lot of church attendance trainings leave you feeling hopeless and discouraged, don't they? And I've been a part of them. I've attended them myself as a church leader, and just feeling like, man, I walk out of there more discouraged than when I walked in, feeling like all the stuff they suggested I do, there's no way I or the team that I work with is going to be able to do that. And it's just frustrating. They tell you about a problem you're already aware of, and they give all these stats about declining attendance and all these stats about the trend of the church and how it's going down. They leave you feeling guilty or feeling like your church isn't cool enough to get more people to show up, because maybe there's a cool church in town that is really growing. And if your church isn't growing, then your church isn't cool enough. Okay, the truth is this: you work hard to get people to show up. You prepare as well as you can to engage them, and you pray. That's the truth. And that's the position that we're coming from in today's webinar. So the main focus of today's training isn't about guilt, all the things you're doing wrong. It's about application, simple things you can do moving forward. So I'm not going to talk in theory. I'm not going to talk about trends of the future of the church. I'm going to talk about some practical things that you can focus on. Number one, because that's what I would want if I were attending this webinar. And that's really the main way that I know how to communicate about stuff, because theory, you guys are already aware of trends. You're already aware of, the declining attendance of the capital C church. So there's no need for us to really talk about that. Now, the way I used to handle low, declining, or infrequent attendance is I would blame people. I'd blame the congregation. I'd blame people, their priorities, their schedules. I would compare my church with bigger churches. And we all know how what that does for us when we start comparing ourselves. And then I would make excuses. And then it got to this point where if attendance, man, that would give me a big sense of worth. In my first student ministry job, man, our numbers we were doing great as far as the student ministry, especially based on the size of the church that we had. And I started basing some sense of my value and worth on how many people showed up. But then we had a senior class graduated, lost some of our influential students, they left, and then attendance started declining, and all of a sudden, so did my self-esteem and so did my self-worth. And I was basing my worth as a church leader and how many people were coming. Over time, here's what I learned. My cynicism didn't increase attendance, and my value didn't derive from attendance. So when attendance was down and I got cynical or I got blamed people or was mad at myself, that didn't help more people show up. On the other hand, when attendance was going well, it's not where I should have based my value and my worth. So focus on God with hope instead of attendance with cynicism. That's what I learned. Keep the focus on God. Take the focus off of myself and off the number of people who are there, and then focus on people with love instead of attendance with insecurity. So if I look at God from a position of hope, getting my worth from him, and then I look at people from a position of love, it's just a better way to approach this discussion. So today we're going to talk about 5 keys to solving the attendance puzzle, as we already mentioned. These aren't the only keys by any means. That would be like a 3-day seminar. We could talk about this. But just some of the many reasons why attendance is declining. People don't feel as guilty for not going to church. And when I grew up, my family, if we missed a Sunday, it was just this huge deal. And there was a lot of people in my community who went to church, didn't even really have an active relationship with God. It was just part of the expectation. I'm from the South, and just people went to church, and if they didn't, they felt guilty. It's not the same these days. People are busier than ever. There's more events for kids that happen on Sundays. I never played in baseball tournaments, to my knowledge, that wrapped up with championship games on Sunday. And maybe I just played on teams that never made it to the championship game. But these days, there'll still be 3 or 4 rounds left of a baseball tournament on Sunday. And it's just a different day and age as far as specialty sports, kids involvement. People are busier than ever, and people don't see the value of community. So beyond God and your relationship with God, there's something that, we kind of understood growing up, is that this is where you go and you get connected with other people who believe like you believe, or people who can share hope, all of this stuff. And these days, people in their faith, maybe it's because of exposure to resources online, or just more of an individualistic approach to a relationship with God. People are kind of like, that's between God and I. That's nobody else's business. We don't need people around. It's kind of island Christianity. So the cold hard truth is your expectations don't match your congregation's priorities. There's this sense of families, because you care about them, thinking, if I were you, I would have my kids in church every week. But that expectation doesn't match that family's priority. Their priority could be academics, it could be travel, it could be cultural experiences for their kids, and it could be sleep, and it could be lawn care that they want to do on Sunday. Church doesn't sometimes trump those other priorities, and it's just what we should understand. And your priorities don't match your community's convictions. You prioritize church for a lot of reasons, and people around us don't feel that same conviction, and that can be frustrating. So the options are to give up, get cynical, guilt people, and become depressed, or think, pray, love, hope, plan, and fight. And what I mean is fight for people to get in the doors of a church, to be exposed to a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. But remember this, the church is not an institution, it's a vehicle for God's movement. So having people in the walls and the doors of a church building at a specific service time, that's great. It's awesome, but that's really not the church. The church was originally started, it was a group of people moving on behalf of a community, moving on behalf of people around them. And then the Apostle Paul launched it off into other places. It was just a place for the movement of God through people on behalf of other people. So remember, attendance, as far as number of people who show up on a Sunday morning, isn't just church. Church is movement. It's God's movement. And the work of the Holy Spirit is greater than the number of bodies and seats. The Holy Spirit can work beyond the walls, beyond service times, and in ways that we just can't predict and can't understand. That's just the mind of God is beyond what we can understand. And it's just good for us to know that when we count the number of bodies and seats and it's not what we want it to be. Okay, so we're going to jump in. 5 keys. Number 1 is love. Okay, you're like, I thought you might say that. It's just good for us to focus back on this word when it comes to the attendance conversation, because you focus on people and their hearts instead of numbers and your dreams. Okay, you should have dreams as a church leader. You should have a big vision that you feel like God has called you to. But remember that dream can't override the people who are there, the families who are there, the people who are struggling, the individuals, the marriages, the financial struggles, the health struggles, teenagers that don't see a vision for their future, kids that don't know about the hope and love of Jesus Christ, families that, marriages that are thinking about getting divorced. You focus on their hearts instead of, on Sundays where there's not a lot of people there, focus on their hearts instead of, man, it doesn't look like this church is moving in the direction that I thought it would, to be a growing, thriving church or a mega church or just a bigger church than it was when I took over. You turn the direction of loving other people in those moments. And what if you could measure movement that reflected the great commandment? Jesus is like, the greatest command is to love the Lord your God. And that's kind of what people expected. And he said the second one is like it. So it was like a co-national championship. It's like two winners of The Voice. He was like, there's 2 commandments, and the one is to love your neighbor as yourself. And so what if we could measure movement not just on attendance? For instance, what if instead of just measuring the percentage of regular attenders who show up, so let's say you have 200 people that consider themselves members, and on an average Sunday you have 80 people who are there. I'm not sure what that percentage is. What if you measured the percentage of regular attenders who serve? So for instance, if 80 people show up, fairly consistently to your church, then the goal would be that I would love for 20 of those people to be serving, to be involved in, pastoral counseling, to be involved in children's ministry, to be on a finance stewardship team, to be involved on a maintenance or security team, to be a small group leaders or Sunday school teachers or involved with teenagers. That I want that number to increase from 20 to 40, that 50% of the people who regularly attend are involved in serving. So that might be a different way for you to measure success and progress than just saying, all right, I want there to be 250 members and I want 150 people to be showing up consistently. That's great. We all want that, but it's not the only way to measure success happening in your church. You can measure it by people getting involved serving, by people who are involved in discipleship, by people who are investing in the next generation. There's a lot of different ways to do it. What if you measured it based on love, not just attendance? Because there can be a lot of people out of church with not a lot of love, not a lot of movement of the Holy Spirit. And there can be a very small church as far as attendance with a lot of love, a lot of impact in the community, and a lot of work of the Holy Spirit. Number two, here's key number two. Think about the people who don't show up, okay? And I really put it in a question mark, because do you think about the people who don't show up? That's a big step. It's a big thing for you to begin developing a habit of doing. And I'm not just talking about the attenders who slept in and you're mad at them. I'm talking about people in the community, people around you who don't show up. So listen, you work hard on your sermons to prepare, to study, to make sure you're handling God's word properly and correctly. Why not find a way for people who miss your service to be exposed to truth? And yes, there are some people who just at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning wake up and just say, you know what, I don't want to go to church. I'm too lazy. I don't want to try to get the kids dressed, get the whole family ready, deal with all the arguing with my kids, and drag my family to church. I'm not going to go. But then there are some people who they work on Sundays, they travel because of work, that they are at tournaments with their kids, and they're missing Sundays, but they don't want to. Well, you spend all this time and work into their sermons, and they want to stay connected to the mission and vision of your church. I feel like there's a gap there that we need to work to close. And we'll come back to that in a second. But, provide easy to use online tithing with the option for automated recurring giving. Let me come back up here for a second and say, so one of the things I think you could take away from this is there a way for you to post your sermons on your website or on YouTube or in a podcast? Or is there a way that just a recording could be, a Dropbox invite or a Google Drive invite that's sent to people in your congregation, so that people who want to keep tracking with the mission and vision that you're casting as one of the leaders, or your senior pastor or your teaching pastor is casting over as the mission and vision of your church, to give people a chance to track with that. People who want to stay connected. Sometimes people are sick, or they move to another town, but they still consider your church their home church, and they want to stay connected to your sermons. Thinking about a way to give them access to Sunday morning sermons when they don't show up. Okay, now, another thing is to provide easy-to-use online tithing with the option for automated recurring giving. And this is providing stability for your church budget when there's infrequent attendance. And a lot of times people, they don't give, number one, because they don't show up, and number two, because they don't remember to bring cash or checks with them. And so even when they do show up, they're like, oh man, yeah, I meant to give. I just didn't bring, my checkbook with me. I'll give later. And then they forget. Online tithing with automated recurring giving allows people to be a part of what's happening as far as contributing to the mission and vision of your church. And the verse is pretty clear. Where your treasure is, there is your heart. And so if people have the opportunity to give consistently, even if they don't show up consistently, their heart is going to stay connected to your congregation, to your church, to the movement of your church and the community. I've had conversations with people who moved to another town, and they said, I want to find another church just like this. And then lo and behold, it's, I'll follow up with them 6 months, a year later, and they're like, yeah, I really haven't found a church. I really still consider your church my home church. And while I don't think that's good, I want them to find a local church to get plugged in with. A lot of them want to mail back tithe checks. They want to stay connected. So if they can listen to sermons online and they can continue to donate to the church, then, we're keeping them in the game, as opposed to just moving to another town with their family and fading away from church altogether. Here's a practical application. Have a technology meeting with some key leaders, elders, and volunteers. And you're going to have to have some people in this meeting who are tech savvy. So, you may have to stretch beyond. You may say, hey, my elder board, none of us are real savvy. You're going to know enough to be able to have a conversation about it. But I'm talking about as far as implementation goes, which I'm terrible at. Need to have some people there or follow up on the back end with some people who can make it happen technologically. Brainstorm more ways to reach and engage people who can't make it to church every Sunday. And you don't have to try to do everything. Just say, hey, you know what? Let's work on developing a podcast so that people in the congregation can subscribe to it, and that way they can hear our sermons if they miss a Sunday and they're driving around. They listen to audiobooks, they listen to talk radio, they listen to other podcasts. Let's make that an option. Or film them and put them on YouTube, or just record them and find a way to send out a recording. Maybe that technology meeting says we do have to find a better, more efficient way to allow people to make automated recurring donations on our website, or we need to have a give button that's clearer and bigger and it's at the top of the fold and they can see it. So technology meeting could be a great application. So Russell, we're going to jump to some Q&A. What's happening in the chat stream?
Yeah, we've got a lot of great questions so far, and still some coming in. I made a list because they were going so fast. We had a question. Is it better to encourage more frequent attendance from regulars, or to get regulars to invite outsiders more?
Well, I think definitely getting regulars to invite outsiders more, because you have to talk about that a lot to people for the vision to stick. So you think about if as a church leader, anytime you say, hey, I would love for you to invite your friends, everybody nods their head like, yeah, that's a great idea. But you have to cast that vision continually for it really to sink into people's hearts and minds. You have to find compelling ways to inspire people to do this, share stories, tell them why, not just like an announcement, but grabbing their heartstrings, highlight, celebrating people who have done that. I think that's going to be powerful, because a lot of people, that's what they point back to. Their life was impacted by someone just inviting them to church, and there's just great value in that. And people just don't get offended when you invite them to church. There may be some rare exceptions, but for the most part, people don't. That's a great question. What's next, Russell?
We had a question from Tom that said, he asked, do you think that people don't see, or do people not see the value of community, or are they seeing more value in other communities that they are participating in? So like soccer, the gym teams, things like that. Do you think that it's more that they don't see the value, or that they see more value in those other communities?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. And it could be both, and it could be it depends on the person. But when I think about community, I'm referring in this instance to spiritual community, and how it seems like this day and age, and maybe it's because of the internet, podcast, the access to blogs where you can get some spiritual encouragement and some truth without having to be around other people. There does seem to be a little more island Christianity, a little more like it's just God and I, and we have our relationship privately, where more people used to be like, aware of going to church and kind of gathering with other people, singing hymns together. And even if they didn't, consciously know this, it was a sense of community. It was a sense of together, we're going to worship God. But yes, I think if there are other communities, as far as relationships that are more appealing, more fun, less, make you feel less guilty, that's certainly a competition for the community that comes with church. So great point. What's next, Russell?
And then another question, this goes back to, I think, talking about people moving away. If someone moves away, do you think it's better or do you encourage, I'm sorry, let me remember how to read really quick. If someone moves away, would it be better to encourage them to attend a church in their new community? I think going back to talking about online church and things like that.
Certainly. Yes, it certainly would be better to encourage them to attend a church in their community. Some people just aren't going to do it. Or some people are just going to say, yeah, you're right. And they're just not going to do it. And I've been in church world long enough to know that people don't do what they say they're going to do, not because they're liars or because, they don't intend to. It's just the reality of things doesn't always match intentions, especially when you're talking to a pastor. Yeah, Pastor, I should do that. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So for people who don't, and maybe it's like 2 years of you encouraging them and it just hasn't happened, or while they're searching for a new church, they can still have access to truth. They can still feel connected to a community. But I've just seen that happen so often where people move away for work, talk about finding another church, and in the end just fall off of church attendance. I've seen it just time and time again. And we got to find a way to stay connected, but to your point, to continue to encourage people to find a local church and a local community. So that's great. Russell, they're going to keep those questions ready and coming. We'll come back to that in a minute. We got to keep moving for the sake of time, but we're going to get back to as many of these questions as we can. We're going to go to point number 3, which is focus on kids. Focus on your children's ministry. You show me a church that makes children's ministry a huge priority, and I'll show you a church with stabilized attendance. And I know this is not 100% true, but the percentages are very, very high. And here's why. It's because for most of us with young kids, we will go places where they're happy. Even if we're not happy, there are places that I'll go to eat. I will go stand out in the heat. I will, help my 8-year-old with science experiments at times where it's just so inconvenient. This is what we do as parents. We sacrifice for our kids, and sometimes we do it with a better attitude than others. But if kids are walking away from church and just so excited to be back the next week, then you're going to show me some parents who are going to be back the next week. And people that grew up in church, they veer away from church, they get married, they're doing their own, new married couple thing where they're traveling and, got all their friends, and then they have their first child. And then somewhere along the line, they're like, you know what? We want our kids to be in church. We do. We want them to get some morals or values, or, we want them to have faith, however people word that. And then they come back to church because they had their first kid, and they're like, well, we don't want to be solely responsible for raising this kid morally and obediently. And so they'll bring them back to church. And if that kid is happy and your children's ministry is communicating to them that we're taking care of them, we're safe, we're loving, we're offering them truth, and we're making it fun, it's going to be great. And churches that I know that really make next generation ministry a priority, attendance is typically pretty good, because I will be honest, okay, I'm going to be real vulnerable with you here for a second. There are some Sundays where I get up and I just want to say to my wife, let's just relax, let's just stay here. Let's just watch online. But we go because of our kids and because of some other things that we're going to talk about in a minute. But we show up because I don't want to be the only voice in the faith of my children. I want them to be exposed to truth from multiple influences in multiple ways, in creative ways. And my church does a great job of that. And that's why we show up more frequently than maybe we would. And when you put time, money, energy into children's ministry, it's just a great way to solve the church attendance puzzle. People make very few excuses on behalf of their kids. And it's like we're showing up because of our kids. And, there's only so many times that a parent would tell their kid, no, I don't want us to go to church, when a kid wants to go to church. Or we need to sleep. We have other things we need to focus on. When children are asking their parents to take them to church, unless their parents are just anti-God, they'll make very few excuses, and eventually I think they'll show up. Then you focus on teenagers, college-age students, and young singles. But start with kids. Start with preschool and elementary age ministry at your church, and then move up from there. And you'll start seeing a difference when it becomes a top line priority. And I'm not just talking about as far as making sure there's enough volunteers. I'm talking about making sure that it's fun and it's exciting. There's a church that talked to me. They had a new leadership came in and they wanted me to do consulting. And I'm like, well, I'm not really a church consultant. Like, I don't really know what you mean when you say that. And they said, well, really, we want some help, mainly getting ready for Easter. And we really want to kind of relaunch this church under new leadership at Easter. Do you have any, advice or suggestions? And I just said, I would just, in the amount of time that you have, which is not a ton of time, get ready for Easter. Just make it awesome for kids. Make it fun for kids. Make it, just do your marketing in the community towards kids. And, oh, wait, so you're a church consultant telling me the main thing that we need to do, they didn't say this, but the main thing we need to do is make church fun for kids? Yes, because kids, when something's fun, they want to come back. And there's a lot about having faith and a relationship with God and being in community with other people that should be fun. It should be fun for kids. So focus on kids and then move up from there. Practical application, do a self-assessment. How much does your church truly do to engage the next generation? Just remember, that is the future of our faith. This is, ever since Abraham and starting all the way to where Moses and then, Joshua, and they established the nation of Israel, passing things along, telling the next generation so that we don't lose that. And that this is why kids, the next generation, is such a big deal at churches. Number 4 is express gratitude. Express gratitude. The best way to motivate is to appreciate. So when I catch my kids doing something right, I want to compliment one of my daughters, and I want to make sure my other daughter can hear it. And I want to thank my daughter because that is the kind of behavior that I want my kids to represent and exemplify, or the kind of attitude, or the kind of humility, or the kind of patience, the kind of grace. You go on and on. And so for me to motivate both of my kids is to appreciate one of my kids when I catch them doing something right. And gratitude is a much better motivator to them than me guilting them or hounding them, although I do that as well. But that's a great motivator for me to appreciate them. The best way to cast vision is to celebrate wins. Again, same goes true with kids. Hey, if I gathered my kids and I just said, hey, I just want to tell you both 2 things you've done recently that I just think is awesome. And I celebrate those things. What my kids are realizing is that's what we value as a family. That's what I want to instill as a parent. The same is true for people in your congregation. The best way to motivate them to show up is to appreciate them for showing up, because they live in a culture like you and I do where we're not getting a lot of appreciation on a day-to-day basis. We don't get a lot of texts just on a random Tuesday where someone says, you know what, I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you. And here's why. Here's what I've noticed in your life lately. It just doesn't happen. And so when you get that, it's rare. And so people are going to return to something that is that rare because it feels that good, and it casts vision. The same thing with people who are showing up consistently, the people who are inviting people. You celebrate them. You make a big deal out of them, either with your staff, with your volunteers, in volunteer meetings, or just on stage publicly. However you need to do it, social media, celebrate those wins because you're casting vision. Hey, this is the kind of place we want this church to be. Practical application is what happens when you attend. And this is a booklet. We'll talk more about this in a minute. But this is a way of appreciating people who show up. Hey, we're so grateful for you. And this is what happens when you show up at church. So Russell, let's jump back into some Q&A, and then we'll get to our last point.
All right. Sounds good. So we had a question. Is there a specific age group that we should focus on attracting/retaining? And then they said we have difficulties with high school to college retention. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would start with preschool and really focus there. And really, I mean, I would say preschool all the way through 3rd grade. I know that's a wide range, but start with the youngest crowd and then move up from there. And the retention from high school and college age thing, number one, almost every church on the planet is struggling with that. So you're certainly not alone in that. One practical suggestion for that would be to think about the older generation, and it's really the generation of that high school, college age, their parents' age, really people who are in the grandparent stage. How about that? Grandparents, challenging them to invest in college age people, to invest in young married couples. And a lot of them around you, grandparent age people at church, have been walking with God for a long time and have, stayed married for a long time and have raised kids who are now healthy, functioning adults who are starting to have kids of their own. And, I just encourage that crowd. Look, you have so much life wisdom from doing things right and doing things wrong. You've learned from mistakes and failures and learned from victories and successes. Don't keep that to yourself. Don't, now that you're retired or you're at the age that you are, don't just, again, traveling's great, playing golf is great, but also give back some of what you've learned, because you have so much life, so much wisdom that you can pass on to this next generation. So part of, I think, engaging the college age crowd is getting grandparents off the sidelines and into the game of inviting them over, inviting them to dinner, spending time with them. That's an application point, and we could talk for a long time about that in a separate conversation. But start with the youngest kids, make sure things safe, warm, make sure volunteers are communicating and smiling at parents who are dropping their kids off, and assuring them that everything's going to be great. And that way, parents can go to church with confidence, knowing that their kids are taken care of, and then just start moving up the ladder from there. Great question. Russell, what's next?
What are some ideas and ways that we can make children's ministry more fun and exciting?
Well, I would just ask kids. I would ask third graders and fourth graders, hey, what can we do to make this place more fun? You're going to get some crazy answers, but you might get some really good insight, and have one-on-one conversations or have conversations with them in groups, and just see what works. The other thing to do is just to pay attention in restaurants, in stores, in different places that you go. Pay attention to what they're doing that's drawing the attention of kids. And some of it is just, it's just, oh, there's toys here, or there's a slide here. But some of it also is creative. They figured out different ways that you can learn from. And one of the things that my church started doing that it is simple is they just have starbursts in buckets, and there's hosts that stand out, and they just hold buckets, and people come and get a starburst. And I'm sure there's parents that hate this idea, but my kids love it, and they get real pumped. This is when we're walking in and they start running towards children's ministry, and then my church does a great job as far as games that they play that match things like my third grader, the kind of stuff, the challenges and stuff like that she's watching on YouTube Kids. And so again, I know about these challenges because I have a third grade child, and she talks to me about it. And so that's why I think a great thing would be is just to have conversations with kids and then pay attention to what's around you. I would love to hear, as you do that, what you learn. And you guys can feel free to jump in the chat stream and share some things you did that have gotten kids real excited at your church. All right, we have time for one more, Russell.
How do you build community within the church and not just people coming in and out, leaving for services?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some ways to encourage people to get in the same place. You can have through small group ministry. That's one way. Having like potluck, lunches and stuff like that, where people stay because lunch is free. And when people eat, people typically have the most community with the people that they eat with. And so I've seen a lot of community develop through, people just eating lunch together or having, breakfast together before church. And, their outings, gatherings, those are tough because, it's a voluntary thing for people to show up in, another day of the week. But certainly I've seen that work. But again, I think if you have things for kids, parents are going to show up, and inevitably parents build community around things that their kids are involved in. It goes back to the point I think Tom made earlier about soccer tournaments and other parents there. Well, you have kind of a common thing that you're gathering around, which is that your kids are playing soccer. And certainly not everybody in your congregation has kids or has young kids, but it is another way to get people, off the sidelines and communicating with each other. But again, this is just a struggle, and this Bible studies, small groups, all of this, that you just have to continue to cast vision and try to get people compelled and get people off the sideline. Men's ministries are effective if you can get men to show up, pushing people to serve and developing community with volunteers. I guess my answer to your question is just every which way possible, and until you find some stuff that's working and is actually getting people motivated and in the game more than just show up and walk out. All right, we're going to jump in. These are great questions. There's some more Q&A in a minute, but I want to get to this fifth point, which is this: develop people who do attend. So don't overlook the handful or the smaller than you want crowd that is there for your services because you're focused on or frustrated at the lack of attendance or the people who didn't show up. Like, what if you focus more on small group participation and active Bible reading than attendance? So let's say your church has 40 people, but you really, really wish it had 100. Okay, so you're like, we have 40 people and, 9 of them are kids. So really we have about 31 people. And I really want us to have 100 people here. Well, what if you really focused on getting those 31 people involved in small groups in a couple, however many that would be, like 3 different small groups? Or, hey, I want to make sure all 31 of these people have a Bible that they understand, have a plan that it's not overwhelming to them, that they could actually, maybe participate in. And I'm going to focus on those percentages while I'm, praying and hoping that more people will show up at this church. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying this is a way to look at things differently. It's like, okay, I want 100 people, but God has entrusted me right now with 40. And so I'm going to be faithful with 40. And I want to focus on being the shepherd leader to them that God wants me to be. And there is a specific vision and mission probably for your church, like what's unique about your church in the community. What did God call your church to? And if it is serving, if it is global missions, it is understanding the Bible, it is, creative worship. What are some of the things that make your church unique? Focus on those with the people God has put in front of you. Think like a missionary to your community, not like a modern American pastor. So what I mean by that is, so you may have to have conversations with people in your congregation and say, hey, listen, we want to be missionaries to our community. And, how does it work when people, become global missionaries? They get involved into new places that are foreign to them, and often, or sometimes even language is different. And so they don't show up and all of a sudden start trying to convert people, right? They show up and they learn about the culture so that they can respect the culture. They learn about the language so they can speak the language of the people to whom God has called them. They build relationships so that when there is a chance to speak, they have that kind of relational currency and influence. And that might be the way that you need to cast vision to your congregation as far as growth, is saying, hey, when you go to the gym, think like a missionary. When you go to work, think like a missionary. When you go to your son's basketball practice, think like a missionary. And what does that mean? It just means you learn the culture. That means that you learn what's going on with other people. You care about them. You develop relationships with them. You listen to them. You look them in the eye. You follow up when they're going through things, because that's going to give you the currency and the influence when it's time to invite them to something that they're going to want to show up at. And it's just a different way of casting vision to the people who do attend to your church. And this could be something that ultimately changes the game for people who do show up at your church to be empowered this way. A practical application: make sure everyone in your church has access to a Bible or a Bible app on their phone, so that if people just can find it and they can pick it up and understand where to start when and if they decide to read it. And this is, for me, a big deal in church leadership is, for some people, they're not going to read the Bible until their back's against the wall. But when their back's against the wall, I want them to know where they can go, and they have a Bible that they can go to, and they know where to turn for answers, and not just playing Russian roulette and ending up in a really crazy passage in Lamentations or, Leviticus, which are all great. But, if they're just kind of closing their eyes and pointing to a verse and hope it speaks to them, there could be some crazy stuff in there. So Q&A. Russell, let's do one question, and then we'll come back to some more questions in another minute.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on first-time guest follow-up?
That's great. I'm glad you asked that question. We're actually going to talk about that, and then I'll come back to some more practical stuff. So that's a great question. I'm going to answer your question with a question. Would you like to motivate attendance by appreciating attendance? Okay. We said appreciation, motivate. Appreciation equals motivation. And really, for people to want to keep showing up, you have to express gratitude to them. My pastor says, what's rewarded is repeated. What's rewarded is repeated. That this is the way you motivate, is by appreciating people. So the past hour, we've covered a lot. We still have questions that are out there that we're going to answer. I'm going to share something extremely practical with you, the most practical tip I can about infrequent attenders in just a minute. We could talk about this all day. Like Russell said, these questions are flying in. We're not even going to be able to cover all of them. Even if we had all day, we couldn't cover everything. And see, I think you need more than just a training. I think you need resources for you and your team. I think it needs to be more. I think you need accountability. I think there needs to be things in your hand that you can pass along. And that's why I'm excited to talk to you about what happens when you attend. And I think that this little booklet is going to be a game changer for you when it comes to motivating through appreciation, through what's rewarded is repeated. So this is rewarding people for this action. It also is casting vision. That's such a big deal. What happens when you attend is about how showing up is important in these 5 areas. So the act of giving someone a book in and of itself is an act of appreciation, but this book itself appreciates them, but it also casts vision. It also casts vision as to why showing up in a local church in a physical form consistently is a big deal. Number 1, community, and we're talking spiritual community. Encouragement. The critical to encouraging word ratio it's very lopsided. People don't get a lot of encouragement in their life, and they need it. Exposure to truth. We are marketed to. We've seen commercials. We're having conversations with people all the time. Media. We don't know how much is true, how much isn't true. And when you can come and sit and listen to the Word of God, you're exposed to what I call the glass of water. The pure truth, which is so good for you. Family faith development. Like I want to tell people sometimes, why you have kids, why wouldn't you show up at church? Why wouldn't you want them to be exposed to principles, virtues of the Bible, a faith that's bigger than you, a hope? Why would we not want to invest in the future generation of the church? It just seems crazy to me. But this book affirms that. It tells families who show up for the first time or have been going there for a while why this is such a big deal for their family. And then the church mission and vision. God chose the church to be its vehicle to pass on his name to other people, and it being a part of a local mission and vision of a church is a huge deal. And we have this restaurant mentality at churches where I don't like this menu and this doesn't cater to me. That's not the way church works. It's not about getting something from the church. It's about being the church. And it's imperfect people, so you're not going to love everything that your church does, but you get in the game with the church mission and vision locally. And that's a huge deal that people don't realize. That's a big deal in people's life. What happens when you attend affirms that. This is the 5 chapters, the way this mini book is broken down. So here's what you're going to get when you jump into what we're going to talk about today. 48 copies of what happens when you attend, accompanying thank you cards and envelopes so that you can write a thank you note and put it in that book and hand it to somebody who's showing up at church for the first time. You can give it to some of your most consistent attenders. You can send it to people as Christmas gifts. You can send it when you send your, annual contribution statement. You can use this in so many different ways. An information table is a great place for it. $199. Now, we love rewarding people who act fast at the Rocket Company. So we're going to throw in the guest services system. So you see, all of this is around attendance and new attenders and people who we want to get more connected to the local church. And that's free if you sign up by the end of this webinar. You jump in before from now to when I stop talking, you jump in. The guest services system is free. And I'm going to tell you what that is. There's an overview. There's a team training guide so you can use this to train a guest services team. Team roles and responsibilities. So it shows you how to break up people. This is a volunteer team, okay? So I'm not talking staff here. You can break up roles and responsibilities, and that'll help you organize it. A meeting schedule and agenda. So now you can train your team, you can give your team their roles, and you can set your meetings all through this. A new visitor prep guide, getting ready for new visitors. New visitor prep questions, an information table guide. This is huge, totally overlooked, underutilized part of almost every church I've been in is the information table. That is a powerful, powerful opportunity that you have with guests and with infrequent attenders to do so many things. Take advantage of the information table guide, and having copies of what happened when you attend on your information table would be awesome. Designed for info table sign-up cards. We have sign-up cards where people can get more information, visitor response, email, connection, huddle guide. This is a little gathering you can do with first-time guests at the end of your worship service. Another great place to give them copies of what happens when you attend. That's $139. This is really a guest services staff position for $139. So here's what you're going to get. You're going to get what happens when you attend, the thank you cards and envelopes, and all the stuff we just talked about in the guest services system when you jump in today. If all this did was appreciate the people who are faithfully showing up at your church, would it be worth it? If all this did was let people who get up and get their families ready and show up week after week, it allowed you to say, you know what? I'm grateful and I appreciate that you do this. If all this did was reinforce the value of your attendees getting encouragement, truth, community, and a great guest services experience, would it be worth it? If all this did would fight the decline of attendance in the capital C church in your community, would it be worth it? If all this did was get some people off the sidelines and in the game in your community, would it be worth it? Churches that think properly about attendance act properly about attendance. When you put it in its proper perspective and it doesn't determine your worth or value as an individual or as a church, but you also think, pray, fight, love, and do what you can to engage people who do show up infrequently, and who don't show up, it just changes the game. And you can see why this is a great deal. Well, today, for $159, you can jump in. Not $159 a month, not $159, every 3 months, just a one-time payment. Then you're going to get 48 copies of what happens when you attend in that guest services system for free. If you get 5 cases of what happens when you attend, we'll drop that price down. I believe it's $129, somewhere around that. We'll drop the price down if you get 5 cases, and just give them to everybody in your church. Give them to that's what I would give this to everybody who ever showed up ever, because it casts vision as to why it's important to show up at a local church. It does not have to be the local church that God has called me to lead. I want people to go to church somewhere because of truth, encouragement, hope, because it gives their kids a bigger vision for the future, because it gives them a chance to hear God's word taught to them. It's just a big deal. So there's going to be a link in the chat stream, or you can open another tab on your computer and just type in whathappenswhenyouattend.com, and it'll walk you through step by step what to do. So 47% off. That's in webinar exclusive. That means while you hear me talking, this offer is going to be good. But again, you get 5 cases or more, we'll drop that price down significantly as a way of saying thank you for making a bulk order like that. But just a great way to appreciate and affirm people who are already showing up. Okay, so we're going to go to Q&A in a second, but I know some of you you're strained for time, so I want to share a few more tips with you. I said if you stay to the end, I would share. Avoid the comparison trap. Avoid bashing the mega church in town. Okay, if you're frustrated about attendance, don't do that. Fight discouragement and depression. turn your frustration into prayer. Every time you're frustrated, let that be a signal, a door to God, something that triggers you that you can talk to God about anything. So this is what I said I would share if you stay to the end. The best attendance habit I've ever established with people who infrequently show up is make a list of your infrequent attenders. This is like once every 2 months, maybe once a month. Make a list of them. And you're like, oh, that will be depressing to me because that's a really long list. That's okay. You can spread out the time and make a smaller list if you want. People who show up every 3 months or something like that. Write down something that you know is happening in their life. And you say, I don't know anything that's happening in their life. You have 2 options. You can get on Facebook, or the next time they show up at church, talk to them or make sure someone talks to them and keep track of it. And then text, call, or ask them about this the next time you see them. So again, if you text them or call them, that doesn't mean you see them. But if you see somebody, and again, an example was my last church. There was a guy because he worked on Sundays. So there's once probably every 3 months he showed up at church because of his job. And I knew he was having some health complications with his back. And so, about once a week, I would text him and not say, hey, why haven't you shown up at church? But I would say, hey, how's your back doing this week? And it was just my way of staying connected with him without having to have a conversation about church. And people who voluntarily show up infrequently, meaning they sleep in a bunch, they have kids who play sports, you can say, hey, how's your son's baseball season going? It's just stuff like that. You can make a list, and then beside their names, you write down something that's happening in their life and keep that list going so that you can stay connected with them about something that's happening with them and not just the church conversation or the awkward conversation because you're a pastor and they haven't been there in a while. Okay, so again, here's everything you're going to get when you jump in today. Total value $338. It's going to be a one-time payment of $159 today when you jump in. What happens when you attend.com. Russell, let's talk about some questions. Fire them away.
All right. So we had a question that said, a culture of casual attendance affects new people who seem to follow suit based on what others are doing. How do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just casting vision. And I think it's hard to cast vision around attendance sometimes because we're not always sure what to say. And so a lot of times we just say, you just need to show up, make sure you don't miss it. Keep showing up because that's just what you're supposed to do. Or that's what your mama did and your daddy did. But again, when it comes back to what happens when you attend, and I'm not saying this is the only way to cast vision. I'm just using this as an example, is talking about things like exposure to truth is a different way of talking about attendance than saying you should show up every week because you just should. It's saying, hey, listen, you need to have some time in your life each week where you're being handed truth because it's hard to tell out there. Or exposure to hope. I've said this to people is, listen, I want my kids to know that there is a hope bigger than me as their parents. And if something happens to me or something happens around my kids or they have a friend who gets sick or something like that, I want them to know that there is a bigger hope than just my friends and my parents. And this is what you can instill in the next generation when you bring them to church consistently. Your kids need other voices in their lives. I mean, encouragement, talking about encouragement and why encouragement is such a big deal. Encouraging each other daily, as long as it is called today. Like the reason the writer said that is because we need encouragement. It's like we need reminders, daily, weekly reminders of who we are and where we want to go. And so I would just keep looking for different ways to cast vision about this to people who show up for the first time and who show up infrequently, and people who seem lackadaisical about this. So keep casting vision. Great question. What's next, Russell?
How can we create volunteers out of infrequent attenders and then infrequent volunteers?
Ooh, that's a great question. I've never heard that question. I guess you just have to look for roles that seem to match their consistency of attendance, or you have to roll the dice and say, all right, they infrequently show up, but if we get them in a weekly service opportunity, then, well, that's going to put a lot more pressure on them to get there. I've never missed a Sunday where I was serving in some capacity because I just didn't want to face the people who I told I would be there. It was like I had accountability. Like I was expected to be there because I had a role. So you can either give them an infrequent role because they show up infrequently, or you can roll the dice and get them into something weekly. I would just give people the option. And I wouldn't maybe word it that way. Just say casting vision as to serving is just say, hey, there's a number of opportunities in this church. I want you to take one of them because this is what God has called us to do, because it is more blessed to give than to receive. You're the one who's going to experience the benefit of this. You have more to offer than you think. And because we as a church need you. God doesn't need you. He doesn't need us. But we as a church, we need you and what you bring to the table, because we think it would just enhance what's happening here. And then just see, hey, we have two options. You can get in roles like this that are, aren't weekly or they're once a month, or you can get involved in roles like this that are weekly or every other week. And I would just invite them. Some people may not serve because you've never asked them to serve. And I would just start asking people. That's great. What's next, Russell?
It looks like that is all of our questions. I think either you covered most of them in your points, or we were able to get to them in the Q&A. If there are any questions that we did miss, feel free to email into help@therocketcompany.com, and we can definitely do our best to get you an answer.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. So help@therocketcompany.com if you have any questions. You can also email help@therocketcompany.com if you've had questions or technological trouble making a purchase on this offer today. But again, what happens when you attend.com, there should be a link that'll be in the chat stream, or you just open a separate tab. You go up top, file, new tab, and then you can type in what happens when you attend.com, and it'll walk you through step by step what you do to jump in today, because you can get 48 copies, which you could just immediately start giving away. This appreciates people, and it casts vision as to why consistently showing up at a local church is a big deal. And then you also get the guest services system for free. This is like a guest services staff position for free. No health insurance, no salary. It's just free. Everything that a guest services staff person would put together, it's already put together. It's just a matter of distributing it to the right people, or printing it off, making enough copies, and giving it to people who want to be on a guest services team. Okay, so awesome. Guys, again, thank you so much. I know we had a lot to cover today. I appreciate you tracking with us and being a part of this webinar. We have a lot of webinars coming up great in the future, covering a lot of different topics that we think we just want to be helpful for you in your church and in your community. And so that's why we do these free webinars, is because we want to help support and serve you in what you're doing, because you're doing more than you have time to do, and you're doing more than you have the staff bandwidth to do. So we want to help. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the next webinar.